Well, welcome everyone to my Authentic Pathways interview series, where we explore the concepts of authenticity and leading a fulfilled life. As I've noticed in my own coaching, these concepts are not easy to do, right? They require us to really know ourselves well and sometimes take risks and leaps of faith in order to pursue what we long for and what gives meaning to our life. So every month I interview someone whom I find is inspiring and wise and can give us glimpses and perspectives into what authenticity and fulfillment can mean from their life. So I'm super excited to welcome the amazing Thom Roelofs, director, teacher, and improviser from The Hague in the Netherlands, to the Authentic Pathways series. Thom is on a mission to bring more light, more joy, and laughter into learning. He's currently studying to direct and teach theater at the Academy for the Arts in Tilburg, while also performing and teaching, also in corporate settings, different kinds of workshops, and directing. And he also has a background in hospitality and business. So, Thom, thank you so much for being here. And I thought maybe we could start the conversation from this point. You're young and you started in hospitality, and now you've transitioned to theater.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. It's really nice to be here. And yeah, so I studied hospitality, and for the people that can't see me at the moment, I'm 26 because Karen said he's very young, just to give you an idea. So I started studying hospitality when I was about 18, 19, did that for 4 years, and then afterwards I went into theater, and that seems like a strange transition. But for me, even during hotel school, I was very involved with a lot of performative extracurricular activities. Like I was doing TEDx, I was doing podcast, I was doing radio. So there were a lot of moments where I had the luxury and the pleasure to work with a lot of people in what's the story that we're trying to tell, and then trying to get that story across. And I think secretly deep down, there was also just someone like a little Tom inside of me that was very excited to do theater. So it was the combination of those two. It was the combination of being very exposed to a lot of performative extracurricular activities, and at the same time being brave enough and having people supporting me basically to take that step and to do a part-time degree. So it's even not a full-time degree, it's a part-time degree where I'm working 4 days a week and then doing 2 days of study. So that's the luxury also how I was able to combine it and make that transition. And I always have to explain it, even though for me it seemed like such a logical step at the time.
And do you find, though, that the hospitality and business is helping you now with what you do?
I think so. I think from when I started in hospitality, I was about 15, 16. I started working in restaurants. And I think every time that I would arrive at a table, you would have to quickly gauge what the situation is, how people are feeling, whether it's a romantic dinner, whether people are having a serious business meeting, and adjust accordingly. And you could call that playing a role. I think it's adapting to the situation, being very sensitive for that. And I think that translated for me very well into eventually theater. Nowadays, when I do more, like what you said, corporate work and also for education, theater has been a huge personal development and discovery. I liked how those tools that theater gave me to do that journey are also things that I would love to share with other people in a setting where it's not so common to have these tools or to look at things through that lens of theater.
So you mentioned the personal development bit. What has that been like for you going through theater? What are some of the things that you've learned about yourself that you've had to grow,
Well,
overcome, I would say?
Well, I think the scariest thing for doing any artistic expression, but in general in life, the scariest thing I think is to put a piece of yourself out there and to be
Mhm.
vulnerable to say, here, this is a piece of me that I stand behind, or this is something that I've created, and judge it. And I think the more you have examples of how it should be done, the less of you is in that piece, the more you go to a direction. And for me, that was very scary, having to overcome my own fears and the fears of judgment, me judging myself in, I'm creating this. Is this worthwhile? Are people going to actually want to come and see this? And I think it's such a scary, but at the same time, very valuable journey. Because at the end of it, I really felt like, wow, and like, I feel more comfortable now being myself and also sharing that part of myself on the stage or off the stage when I'm teaching, and to be comfortable with that. Any form which challenges you, and for me, that was theater, because there's nowhere to hide on the stage when you have to create something, and when you are directing a scene and there's two people up on stage and you're like, this doesn't work. I don't know why, but this doesn't work. Trusting your gut and saying this doesn't work, but I also don't have the answer right now why it doesn't work. Or going out there and daring to say, I love that, but personally, I still want to do this. That's the scariest part because you're trying to stay true and be authentic to yourself and say what you feel and experience in that moment. And that's very scary because there's no template for it for the arts, luckily, but also that's scary.
Yeah, I can completely relate to that. And I actually did improv with Tom. That's how I got to know him. 2 years ago, I took an improv course, and it is this idea of you have to trust your gut and your brain that it's going to come up with something creative in the moment. And I find it's very interesting, this almost tension between what authenticity means. So you said it has allowed you to be more and more yourself, and yet you're acting on stage, and yet you're being also more yourself off stage. So I'm a
Yeah.
bit curious about that dynamic.
Yeah, there's like a number of things that you said that I immediately want to jump on and talk about. I think the first one for the people listening that don't really know what improv theater is, just to give it a tiny bit of clarification. So it's an art form where two actors go on stage and there's no preconceived notion of the lines that they're going to say. I think it's important to say like that doesn't mean that they have no clue what they're going to do. Very often there are limits. When I give the example, I say we are playing like we're setting out the lines of the playing field, but we don't know the rules in which the game is going to be played or how the game is going to go. If you take a sports analogy, we know we're going to play football, we know we're going to do improv, but how the match is going to go or how the scene is going to unfold, we don't know. But that doesn't mean that we haven't practiced for hours and hours and hours off stage, making sure that we know how to play football or any other sport for that matter. So I think that's an important clarification because sometimes people feel, what is improv? What is it that you actually do? Then the second one, basically, how do you stay true to yourself even while you're acting? I think the challenging thing is we all have different versions and sides of ourselves. And technically, all of those are true. If I'm grumpy on a Monday morning, that is just as true as me being excited on a Friday afternoon. And I think in acting, what we're trying to explore is these different sides. And even in improv, we're trying to explore these different sides of us and finding the truth in the characters. What can you connect to? What grounds them so that they have 2 feet on the floor? That it feels like, oh, this is not something that we made up, but it's something that we can live in. Does that mean I can live in every character that I play, that I'm fully grounded? No, I'm also still searching and I'm also still like making mistakes there and that it doesn't always come supernatural. But I think the beauty, and this is maybe an oxymoron, like what you said as well, is that the more in improv, at least, the more comfortable you are with not doing anything, the more ideas and the more suggestions, the more fuel you have to do things. And it sounds very counterintuitive, but the calmer you are, the more you can enjoy being in the moment. And I think that's the core of it. The more you can enjoy being in the moment, the more that allows you to adapt to these strange moments and environments that arise in improv, where someone says you're in a hospital or you're in an airport or whatever.
And Tom, how do you take that idea of being grounded and calm and super in the present moment, and then as a result of that, you experience more joy on the stage? How does that translate then off the stage?
Well, the one thing that we haven't spoken about is how does that translate off the stage? Well, there's a beauty in improv, and that's why I think many people fall in love with it. And that's that you don't do it alone, and that the other person is there to support you and to work together with you. So the concept of yes and, which has been described in many different forms, but acceptance and looking to build together on what is already there. Yes and doesn't mean you need to agree with everything the other person said, but it means acknowledging their reality and looking to work with them, whatever that means in that context. So looking to build together on something. And I think having other people support you to the fullest and that you feel supported to generate your own ideas and have other people be a part of it, that's such a wonderful feeling that encourages you to be your authentic self, that encourages you to play, to try things out, to fail. And I think that's what makes it such a literal playful art form, where a lot of the trainings and things that we do, they're to conquer fear. And we conquer fear with playfulness. We conquer fear with joy and overcoming things together.
Mhm. Can you give some examples of that, of actually people that you've seen in your classes, or you've done some corporate workshops, of how then that conquering of fear happens? Like, what do you see? in the sessions with people?
I think it has a lot to do with challenging perceptions or convictions that people have, and then realizing what are those convictions stopping them from doing. So, in a lot of the corporate work and things that I do, it's, for example, about connecting with the other person. And that could be as simple as trying to clap at the same time as the other person. That is seemingly very easy, but it requires a focus, a presence to be with the other person and to look at each other and to take a moment to actually notice when they're initiating a clap or when they're there in that moment. And most of the times, even that is very challenging. So the moment I can get people as a just as a warm up, for example, to start looking at each other and to realize, oh, there's this other person, there's this other world going on beyond mine. I'm not only thinking about my work, about the groceries I have to do, about all the things in my head. The more I can be present in that moment and realize, like, that's where the other person is and I can meet them there. Like a great example that I often give on Zoom now or for a podcast, it's very difficult. But once you have a conversation, after 5 or 6 minutes, just ask the other person if they know what color shoes you're wearing. Because most of the times they will have not paid any attention to this. It's just listening and thinking and these type of things. And just taking a moment to having observed the whole person. It's very similar to PQ as well, like trying to be observant and trying to be in the moment. And maybe you need to explain PQ a tiny bit for the listeners. Maybe they already know, but it's very similar to trying to be so present in the moment that you start noticing details.
For the listeners, PQ stands for positive intelligence, and that's the coaching framework that I use that Thom has been introduced to as well. And it's really about using our senses, all of our senses, to be in the present moment. Because indeed, it's like if you can be here and now, it gives a sense of grounding and calm. And then that gives you choice. So it's thinking about, well, when we are fully present, we're more aware of our own bodies, what's going on in our own minds, but also of the other person. And it's very interesting because I talk often about self-awareness and coaching and how important that is. But it starts with the self, but then it's becoming aware of the other person, like you described. And then it's becoming aware of the interaction between all of us. And then if you even have a bigger group, it's like, okay, what's happening with the energy and what's happening with the entire group. So there's a lot of layers of awareness, and that does require full focus and to be in the present moment. And as you say, kind of have those powers of listening and observing and trusting your gut. It's practice, practice, practice. My question to you is, again, do you notice that you take these concepts of grounding, tapping into your senses, besides doing it in improv, are you finding that you're doing it also more in your day-to-day?
I would have someone observing me to decide whether or not that's true. But I think there's a sense of freedom and a sense of following impulse. I think that's for me the biggest one. So even as we are sitting here recording right now, for the people that can't see it, but there's other people here that have their cameras on that I can look at. And my impulses are telling me 100 different things to react to say, to ask, and these type of things. And I think being in the moment, feeling these impulses, even in conversations, like, hey, that evoked something in me. I want to react to that. Or I think there's something there. Even like, this is going to sound a bit cliche, but like a while ago, I was saying goodbye to my girlfriend. She was leaving by car. And I was like, it's so cliche, but I feel like I want to run after the car just because I feel like I want to do that. And it's such a cliche movie thing. Like, you shouldn't do that. But at the same time, like, I did it. And then that creates also a scenario where you're playful, authentic, and it puts a smile on the other person's face and on your face as well. It's the same like if you feel like you're waving someone out at the train station, and the train's driving off, and you want to just run along the train just for the fun of it. And we never do that because that's unheard of. And even though sometimes we feel these behavioral impulses, and this for me, it also connects to play, of course, but I think being connected to those impulses just makes life more fun because there's these opportunities for play or for authenticity that are just a joy, and they're a joy that's right there, that you don't have to do anything other for than what you're already doing.
Oh, that's beautiful. I love that example. I could just see you, running after the car.
Yeah.
That's great. And Thom, let's talk a little bit about this idea of fun. I know that it's very close to your heart, and together with the idea of bringing laughter and joy and play into learning. I think that's maybe going more to the idea of fulfillment, like what fulfills you and what is compelling you to go on this path
I think it started when I was like a lot younger, when I was in high school. Play, which was video games at the time, was not so much the video games as it was the other people that I connected with online while we were playing the games. And I don't think it mattered what games we would play, but it created this sense of community and also a sense of striving towards a goal. We all love to play. I think that's the conclusion of it. And I realized then I really love to play. And I also notice what it does to people. When I give workshops, let's say we're in a room, I could ask you to say, okay, I would like you to move more. So can you just run randomly in this room? And then everyone's going to feel like, yeah, why would I do that? That doesn't motivate me. But if you tap them on the shoulder and you say, tag, you're it, and you run away, like that will immediately instinct a certain playfulness and a recognition that just does the same thing. Because play, like playing the game of tag, is nothing more than running around in the room just trying to avoid the other person. But all of a sudden we're doing the goal, what we're trying to achieve. Like the end goal isn't the thing that we focus on. It's how do we make the journey to it very joyful. And in that, there's a few wonderful books that have been written by incredible people on improv and the improv literature. And a lot of what improv is literally designed for play. Maybe for the listeners to give two concrete example, Keith Johnstone, he's one of the founders of improvisational theater. And what is remarkable is a lot of what he designed is basically designed on how do I bring back spontaneity. There's a famous quote, and please correct me if I don't say it entirely correct, but he said when he was 7, and one day he decided to stop believing everything that his parents or what the adults said. And the day after, he decided to see if the opposite was also true. And eventually, when he started teaching improv, he said that he designed his curriculum based on everything that the teachers told him not to do. So he started teaching improv by saying, we need to make faces. We need to be spontaneous because that's the thing we're not allowed to do in schools. We need to have fun. And so his curriculum was designed purely on that. And another great example was Viola Spolin. She's a woman who created or basically had a school of children in improv and designed improv games, taught acting principles. To give you a concrete example, she had kids on stage and they were having trouble naturally interacting with each other, naturally making physical contact. And so she designed a game which was called Contact. And the game works as follows. You're only allowed to talk when you make physical contact with the other person. So naturally, first people use their hands, and eventually she forbids them from using their hands. So they have to use the feet and they have to get creative. And I think for me, play comes from these creative restrictions. And this is what we as humans are so good at, is you put restrictions on us and then we find ways around them or to conquer them. And for me, that's really what creativity is. So when I give workshops or in a broader concept, that concept of play means for me, like, how do I create an environment that feels fun, where people don't feel daunted by the challenge that is ahead of them, but that they enjoy trying to overcome these tiny hurdles that I've set along the way, so that eventually they learn the skills that I would like to teach them without me telling them what they need to learn, but just by overcoming these challenges, they will need those skills, thus they have learned them.
So it's like you're creating the environment
Yeah.
for them. And how do you get adults then to get out of their head and like just play? Because it's something almost that we lose. Many adults do. We're so serious and go to work and, even in schools, like I coach quite a few schools and my background is in education and we tend to be sometimes so serious. How do we get more play into our lives?
Yeah, I wish I had the answer to say this is how we solve all of the issues with surrounding play in schools. I think for me, I fundamentally believe that we all enjoy to play. I think that it's trying to meet people where they are, at what level of play they are at. So I think some people that feel like they can't play or that they have no right to, we won't start with playing a game with them that is super theatrical or super like a lot, but a game that just encourages them to connect. There's a great game that you can play to be more present. It's from the book of Viola Spolin, and it works as follows. If you want to try this with your colleague or someone else at home, please do. It's called Three Things, and it's in the beginning of the book, and it's about connecting with other people. How it works is you stand opposite of each other, and then one of you turns around so that they can no longer see the other person, and the other person makes 3 changes to their outfit. So that could be that you unroll a sleeve. That could be that you take off your glasses. And then the other person turns around and tries to guess those 3 changes. it's a seemingly simple exercise, but all of a sudden we're realizing we're looking at the whole other person, and it's in a series because eventually it comes to mirroring and really connecting with the other person. But it's a baseline for people to be like, oh, I'm finally allowing myself to really be present in the moment and to notice things that I hadn't noticed before. And before I know it, I'm connecting with the other person. And we're both observing things like, oh, wow, that's a new sweater that you're wearing. I didn't realize that. And I think that's a starting point. So those games, when we speak, coming back to your question about play, that's a starting point for play. And if people are okay doing that, then we up the difficulty. And every time we up the difficulty until they are playing, like we just up the difficulty until eventually they're on stage doing improv and acting. And people are like, how did I get here? Well, that's elements of play. And there you are.
And tiny, tiny little steps, as you say, every time getting more
Yeah.
comfortable. You've mentioned the importance of that acceptance and that it's okay to fail and that it's that community that's supportive in order to do that.
Yeah. And I think that's very much on the teacher. And in my personal experience, I've just been very lucky that I've had both people encourage me. And I've also had some experiences where I didn't feel that safety. And that's like one of my first shows ever on stage. I think it was my first show ever. I went on stage, and after doing an exercise, one of the hosts started explaining to me that I didn't understand the game in front of the audience and how I had misinterpreted the game. And yeah, that didn't make me feel safe, but it also really made me realize how important that safety is. So that any show that I did afterwards where I had people doing improv for the first time, that was a moment for me to realize, okay, that safety is very important. I want to make sure that it's there. Yeah, I was lucky enough to have people that encouraged me, pushed me to do theater, but I think we all have people in our lives that can sometimes push us. Or if you think improv is very scary or any form of play is scary, like it's easier to bring someone along to a board game night than to go all by yourself. And I think the same is true for many forms of play. It's easier to play together than it is to play alone.
And that idea of safety, then many of the leaders that I coach, they lead teams. How do you create trust and safety in a group?
I mean, from my experience, and that's specifically in the sense of leading courses or leading those groups of people, I think it's a combination of both being okay to be vulnerable yourself. So for me, it's allowing yourself to make mistakes in that sense and doing things with the best intention. Safety for me is built up step by step. Every time that someone fails and that we handle it in a good way as a group, so we encourage it, we celebrate it, someone feels respected and someone feels okay, that was scary, but I've overcome that and we've celebrated that together. A little more safety is there to try something a little scarier next time. For me, I find it difficult because I'm not currently leading a team. If you're asking for vulnerability or that courage from other people to try and show it yourself and to try and acknowledge that these things are scary, and at the same time do everything to set people up for success. And I'm sure many leaders are already doing that, but for me, setting up for success, yeah, for me, it meant a lot, like trying to really dig in and to really make time for every person. Like, what's the thing that's hindering them? And of course, in my line of work, that may be easier because I can often see what's hindering them. And in business, you may not always see that, but I can see someone on stage that is struggling, and then we can work together on that specific element to see what's the skill or the behavior that is not helping you right now in this specific moment. Perhaps if I link it to the leadership, it's the more you are present in the team, the more you become observant. I think that might give you more opportunities to notice things within your team and other people around you, what they might need. So that could be a way that I could see, hypothetically, that might help leaders.
Yeah, and I think that piece where you've mentioned meet them where they're at and create that connection just through the observation, through the mirroring that you describe. I think that's so important because then you create this sense of being seen and being heard. And I think that creates safety. And Thom, what are some things that you still feel challenged by that you are working on and want to grow in?
I mean, there's many. The list goes on and on. The core for me is like I'm also still working on building up the confidence to completely be okay and authentic with myself. And I think many of us are. So that's an ongoing journey. What I would still love to work on, well, like hospitality, the benefit of being very good at thinking what other people need is that very often you place yourself on the second spot. And that's something that for me has been a very big part of my life, trying to put other people first and trying to put others' needs above my own. So trying to now, in a context of the directing is a example, but just in general life, trying to set boundaries and to not always be flexible towards other people is very challenging for me. Trying to be see what I need and to follow that, because if you are very in tune with the feelings of other people, again, that also sometimes can block out your own feelings. So for me, that's a hard thing that I'm learning and practicing and working on. Yeah.
You can almost
Yeah.
lose yourself and you're totally immersed in their reality, their observation, and you forget to observe yourself
Yeah.
and what you need. And maybe it is a boundary that you need to set.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very often as a teacher, I'm so tuned in with the rest of the group. We'll do a check-in round to see how everyone's doing. And then I will not say how I'm doing because I'm like, now I know how everyone's doing and the focus is clear. Yeah.
And I experienced the same as a coach. It's something I have had to work on because initially I would be completely consumed by the other person. And you give and you give and you give. And then you're like, oh, wait a second. What about me? What about my energy? Or also, I think by giving so much of yourself, your battery runs low or some of the boundaries are passed over. And therefore, it's also you cannot serve as well. You cannot be the teacher you want to be.
So how was that for you? What did you do to overcome that?
It goes back to the awareness and starting with the awareness in yourself and being those constant check-ins. So like even as I'm having this conversation with you, it's like grounding my feet into the floor or seeing the way your eyebrows kind of move up and down, right? So it's being present to what's happening in me so that I can also kind of regulate that. It's a skill that you need to develop. And I'm still developing that as well. I think you said it correctly. It's a journey. It's a real journey. And I don't think there's an ending, but it's the process there. How can we make it as fun as possible?
And I think to add to that, I think how to make it as fun as possible, but also how to set yourself up for success. And this is something that I think 1,000 management books talk about the same concept. I think Atomic Habits is a great example of like how do you build an environment for yourself that encourages you to play or to change your behavior. And I think that is also what for me, what play is. Play doesn't come like, oh, let's play. It's like, okay, how do we make sure that there's a playful environment? And I think that also applies very much to your personal life. How do you set up an environment of play? Like for me, having regular improv classes is a way because they're regular that there's always an element of play in my week. And I think that's the same thing in your own life. Like I try to now journal more or to draw or to do things that I find fun, even though I may not consider myself to be like good at them, but do them for my own enjoyment. And I think setting up these environments is just as important as deciding, hey, I want to play more. The hardest part comes from, okay, now I need to design that so that I actually have the opportunity to do that.
Yeah, true. And I think I'm missing that a little bit. I need some more play. I need to maybe sign up for another improv class.
I'm curious from your perspective, and maybe also for the listener, it's interesting to hear like from maybe a more neutral perspective, like how did you experience improv and what changes did it bring for you connected to authentic leadership?
I loved it. It gave me permission in this setting to be 7 and 8 years old again. And I'm also quite competitive. So, tag, you're it. Totally my game. I would be like running around like crazy. It allows you to kind of let go and let go of all this, oh, what are other people going to think of me? It's like seconds, milliseconds that is required of you to do something, to say something, and to kind of be okay with sounding silly and stupid. But also like, I don't think I had laughed so much in
Yeah.
years. Like my belly hurt, my cheeks hurt from smiling. And I would come home all buzzed. And then I couldn't sleep until like 1 a.m., which is why I haven't continued with the classes. I also needed my sleep. So I'm looking for an improv class that starts maybe a bit earlier and ends a bit earlier. But I think also the idea, besides just the fun and the laughter and the letting go of what people are going to think, learning to trust yourself and building confidence to just like even in this moment, what am I going to say? I don't know what I'm going to say, right? It's just like trusting your own stream of consciousness to say the right thing. And if you don't say the right thing, to be okay with that and learn from that.
And interestingly, because you say the right thing, like what is the right thing to say? And I think what is so interesting for me what I see is some of the biggest blocks for people doing improv in the beginning is that they're worried about saying the right thing.
Mm.
They're worried about what is the right answer, what is the right thing to do. And they're trying to get that from context. But in improv, when there's an empty stage, there's very little context. And the context comes from making that first decisive move. So what I see a lot, and this is something that a lot of people who are starting out improv, the insecurity comes from two actors, they go on stage, or two players, they go on stage. And what very often happens is a thing called questions. Where are we? What's going on? And because no one is daring to make that decision, they get left in this uncertainty. And that, I think that is an essential thing, trying to be okay in that uncertainty and daring to make decisions. That's such a huge way because you're trusting yourself to make that decision and to be okay with that uncertainty and then moving forwards from that. And for me, that's such a wonderful thing to see when people start discovering things, because making that first decision doesn't have to mean I need to think of what the decision is. It could be discovering the decision, something we do a lot, like looking around your room as you are sitting now at home, or if you're on the way, looking around and seeing something that inspires you, something that catches your eye. That could be the source of inspiration from where to start. And it's as simple and as complicated as that.
Oh, I love that you caught me on the right thing. And when I say the right thing, it's it's actually more of like, oh, I haven't understood even the game correctly or something. So that's what kind of what I mean with the right thing. But you're right. We often get in our heads and we think, oh my God, I need to say the right thing. So it is letting go of that and being creative and enjoying the creative process and allowing things to emerge of whatever needs to be emerged at that moment with this person in the scene. Yeah, getting that inspiration also from anything around you. I love that. I'd like to open it up to any questions from people, if there are any. I have more, but I would like to see if our conversation has triggered anything amongst Bridget or
Yeah,
Kristen.
I have a
All right,
question.
go ahead, Bridget.
Okay, first of all, Thom, I can't believe you're 26 and so incredibly wise.
I
So,
told you.
yeah.
Yeah.
I wanted to comment on that, first of all. Secondly, my name is Bridget. I'm also, like Karin, a coach for leaders. And I am thinking about the current context of a world where, look, I mean, we're always surrounded by uncertainty, but my clients are mostly leaders in education, and they are buffeted these days by new rules, new requirements, things being thrown out the window. They're in front of their communities and constituents daily, fielding queries and needing to show up as authentic leaders in a very uncertain environment. I wonder, Thom, if you just can think of like two or three ways that they can time themselves a bit for drawing on lessons from improv to be up there on the stage and be decisive, be an authentic leader. And maybe it's just a little sentence stem, even a yes and, or something that I might be able to share with them. Or maybe you even have resources that I can point them to. I'm sure I would love to take your class. I'm sure everybody should take your class. But I wonder what comes to mind for you when I'm sort of putting it into today's context.
Well, first off, thank you so much for the question, Bridget. The first thing that came to mind for me is in improv, and this may not surprise people, but we do warm-ups. We do warm-ups before we go on stage. And I think warm-ups help us to get our minds in the space that we're going to be occupying and realizing also what are some of the things that are going to come our way. And I think for me, when I am late to a show and I have to run straight on stage, I'm also not present. I'm on that stage and things being flown towards me, they rattle me, they throw me off. So when I think of that, there's some exercises, some grounding exercises, but also some warm-up exercises just to get our into the moment, into the present moment. And that could be from breathing exercises to some associative exercises, some listening exercises.
Their communities are looking to them for answers. But I think mostly they're looking to them to be decisive about something. And I think that's a challenge. Now, just for example, these issues around diversity, equity, inclusion, justice in schools that schools have been working really hard on. And now they're getting these mandates that, no, gotta just eliminate that from your school, that sort of thing. And then the communities are like okay, what does this mean? I haven't done improv, so
There's a new methodology that I'm learning at my studies, which is called Wicked Arts. And it speaks about the teacher as a conceptual artist. So rather than telling people what to learn, they're designing questions, assignments that encourage people to discover the skills that they need to overcome this obstacle. To give you a very concrete example, I'm doing a class where I want people that have never done anything with theater to discover theater and the joy and the research of that. So last night I gave them the assignment, please make a performance that speaks like a music performance that speaks about something that you're frustrated about. Then I can be on the same side of the table with them, co-creating, okay, what does it mean? What is a music performance? What is something that you're frustrated about? And if I relate it to your context, if the diversity and inclusion, if that's the challenge, like you can either position yourself as in, I need to know the answer to this query and provide people with the answer, or see if you can position yourself within the rest of the group where you're together
Mhm.
looking at this. What's the question that we're being asked right now that we don't have the answer to, so that we're on the same side of the table trying to resolve it? Because otherwise, you have to be smarter than everyone else in the room and then provide the suggestion, which is very hard to do.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So wicked arts, huh?
It's a wonderful methodology that we're teaching, and it's also very scary because I, as a teacher, feel like I'm no longer teaching, I'm just giving assignments. And of course there's all this research that goes into designing them, but
Yeah.
they're doing all the hard work. I think that's a big one in education, to try and see, can I set up this environment of play and then let them play, and as they are playing they will figure out a solution that I couldn't think of.
Mm.
The students that
Yeah.
I'm teaching right now are doing scenes and things that I'm like, I could have never done that. Oh my god,
Mhm.
I'm a fraud. Why am I teaching them? And I think that's the sense of also here, where it's like, if they have in a playful way they can tackle this,
Yeah.
then that could be a great way to get together and together face the problem, rather than to feel like I need to face the problem so that I can help other people across this bridge, rather than
Yes.
building the bridge together.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you.
Great question, Bridget. Thank you for that. Do you have another one? Or Kristen, do you have a question for Thom?
Yeah, so one question that popped up in my head right in the beginning of the conversation when you talked about being on stage and doing improv and being authentic there, and then how this helps you being authentic in and more present in the moment off stage. I was thinking, usually when people are on stage, at least this is how I imagine it, they are acting. So even if it's not a play but improv, you would have the chance to portray someone you are not actually in real life. How does it go together with being authentic?
That's a good question. I think there's probably the truth is probably somewhere in the middle, in a sense. Like, I agree. I think that if you're trying to fully encapsulate a role, you may try and bring different behaviors, different parts of you to the stage. However, I think for me, the authenticity comes in the form like, whichever you're playing, you're hoping to find a truth in that character or person that can react and be in the moment. So what I mean by that is, let's say I'm on stage, I'm playing a character, and his name is Jake or Gerald or any name, for example. If something happens, I would still like Jake or Gerald to be able to react to the thing that's happening. We've had shows where, for example, a car alarm goes off, or an audience drops a glass or sneezes very loudly and someone else bursts into laughter. Then the authenticity comes in, trying to be present in that moment and being authentic from the perspective of the character that you're playing, where you can react to what's happening in that moment. Whereas you could also say, and this is sometimes in scripted theater, where it's like, okay, this is my line. I now need to say that. I'm going to tune out everything else that is in this room. I'm going to pretend like nothing else is going on. And then we are pretending. Does that answer your question?
Maybe I would also feel if you have this experience on being on stage and reacting to what is happening around you in the moment, it also helps you to react, or maybe also sometimes not react to things that happen around you when you're
Yeah.
sitting in the office with your colleagues in the meeting or trying to figure out what's happening.
Maybe the one thing to add, which I think is very fascinating, is for me, there's a number of speakers that I really like. And some also speak like, everything that we do is a learned behavior. So, for example, my voice right now is a learned behavior. The way I walk, the way I talk, everything is a learned behavior. That also means let's say I don't like the way that I talk and I would like to talk differently, I can change that. The same goes for behavior. And if I eventually keep doing that, that will become my new behavior. Does that mean that that new behavior is then no longer authentic, or is that behavior still authentic? And I think that if we approach it in that sense, what I think actors train themselves to do is to make that process to go from this new role and transitioning into that new person as short as possible so that they can authentically embody that new role. And for us in leadership, I think when we take any sort of leadership training, any sort of coaching, we become aware of patterns that we may want to change, and we are changing our behaviors. We're becoming Tom 2.0 or like Kristen 2.0, and they are authentic versions from us, but they're also like adapted versions of us. So I think that's for me where that authenticity and that play comes in. And I thought, yeah, I just wanted to mention that because I think that's a very concrete example as well.
Great questions, Kristen. Thank you so much. Bridget, any other ones?
Yes, when's your next improv class starting?
I mean, if you're in the Netherlands, then
I'm in The Hague.
Oh, absolutely. Well, there's going to be new ones starting in April. And in general, I think improv is such a tight-knit community still. It's a huge art form, but compared to many other communities, it still feels like a family. Improv people are some of the nicest people that I've ever met. You can ask them, and if you reach out and say, I would love to take a taster class, they will say, please come on down and we'd love to have you.
It also sounds like you are doing consulting in the corporate space. I can imagine you expanding that to the education space and elsewhere. So my hope is that you are aspirational and looking to expand your offerings.
I'm now working on a project in the education space with the Erasmus University, and we're working with 5 other female researchers. I feel a bit weird, but we're working on female leadership. And then my role is not to tell people how to be a female leader, but it's about what are the skills that they've researched are needed, and I'm here trying to design exercises that teach those skills. And I think that's a beautiful way where I get to combine some of the business knowledge that I have with the improv and at the same time see if I can tackle topics that are very important. And then we're not trying to get people to play a different version of themselves. We get them to try and experiment with behavior, because that's 90% of what we do in improv. Experiment with behavior.
Sure. Yeah. In a safe space.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Can you give an example, Tom, of an exercise, or what are the behaviors that you notice or that these researchers have come up that are limiting female leaders that you're trying to then with improv help them grow beyond that?
Well, one thing that is very challenging and which is perhaps a bit unfair, but how we are perceived for women and for men in business is not the same. And I think that's not something new when I say that. But certain behaviors in one gender are perceived very differently in the other. So how a man does something is perceived very differently for women. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to explore behaviors. A lot of what I focus on in theater also has to do with, for example, status. And status doesn't mean what position you hold, but it has to do with your body posture and what you showcase to your environment. Dominant is not the right word, but it does give how much presence. Maybe presence is the best word. And traditionally in theater, that can be the king and the jester, for example. And we're staying away from that, but it's just to illustrate the point. And what we are trying to do is we're trying to play with different behaviors to allow people to experience different forms of presence and to try on these new behavioral jackets that may not fit right away, but eventually when they do fit, they realize, wow, this is a great look. And to give a very concrete example, when someone at work would ask you the question in the following way, so who hired you to work for this company? And I would ask you to just respond to that question as you would. And you can hear right away, it's not a pleasant question. So who hired you to work for this company? Now, afterwards, what we would do is then we would look and say, okay, what techniques can we use to try and change the way we respond to that question? So in improv, we use techniques to help you listen better, but there's also techniques to make sure that we keep this judgment in a way away from us. So now what I would like you to do, I'm going to ask the same question and just, you can repeat the question. So you just repeat it neutrally. You don't need to say it in a cynical way. You just repeat the question neutrally and then you answer. So again, I would ask the question, so who hired you to work for this company? And then you would first repeat the question. So who
So
hired me
who
to work for this?
hired me?
Yeah,
Who
who
hired
hired me
you
to
to work
who
for
hired
this
me for the
company?
work for this company?
Mhm.
Well, it was because what's happening in that first one, when you're responding right away, by responding right away, you're in a way accepting that that's okay to ask that question. And when you're repeating that line, you're saying, is this the question that you're asking me? I will choose whether or not I respond. But first, I'm going to consciously recognize that this is the question that you're asking me, and then choosing whether or not I want to respond. And then the third beat, which we go to, is we say, okay, now I would like you to like take a second. So take a pause between answering, because it's taking up that space, taking up that presence in the room. And of course, this is not a guideline where it's like, this is how to do it. This is something which in a workshop we're experimenting with, where we're trying out to see what works for you. What are behaviors that help you take up that presence in a way that still feels comfortable or slightly uncomfortable, and then we make it comfortable. But I think that's a very concrete example where we're trying to practice these behaviors where a lot of us have learned behaviors that don't always benefit us.
Hmm.
Is that a concrete example, or does it raise any other
That's
questions?
fascinating. I see so many applications for the work I do, the work Karin does.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you for joining both
Oh,
Kristen and Bridget.
Yeah.
Wonderful questions from you all. Thank you for being the audience. And
Yeah.
Thom, thank you so much for
Yeah.
helping us understand more about the importance of play and improv and how that can lead to more authenticity. So thank you so much for your time today. So that was it for our conversation with Thom. Next month, for International Women's Day on Monday, March 10th at 5:30 CET, I'll be speaking with Peju Abuchi. And she's an award-winning poet, inspirational speaker, coach, educator with more than 20 years of experience. And she's passionate about empowering individuals, communities, and organizations to ignite their inner spark by shaping how they live, love, and lead. And she has been featured on Channels TV, BBC Radio, The Office for Institutional Equity, Aspire Global Unity Conference, The Voice, Women in Leadership publication, and the London Mayor's Office. So Peju is a superstar, and I'm so honored that she is going to have a conversation with me. And please join us. You can find the link to sign up live in the description.